To the Barrier Reef now, where underwater diving has long been a popular pastime. Wetsuits, aqualungs and underwater cameras are commonplace these days. It was not always so, of course, and our next speaker, Kitty Monkton, experienced the reef in a very different era. Her husband Noel was one of the pioneers of underwater microscopic photography. In 1974, Ros Bowden met Kitty Monkton on Green Island near Cairns, where she played the piano for tourists in the evening. They talked first about the early efforts of trying to film underwater with rather primitive equipment.
Well, really, the microscope was the cause of it all. Noel his hobby was the microscope, and he'd been experimenting, making films through the microscope, and a couple of these items were bought by Fox Movietone News. And Noel at this time was rather disenchanted with his life as a musician. And when he said to me one day, let's go away to the Barrier Reef and make films, I said, all right, when do we start? And in 3 weeks we were off and we never went back to music. Noel's first underwater gear was rather primitive because he was the first one to film underwater and there was no equipment available at all. And he had a plumber make him a galvanized iron helmet kind of thing, which we used to call the Ned Kelly because it reminded us of Ned Kelly's helmet. And on the front there was a piece of glass for him to see through, and a hose came from the side of it into a dinghy where I was sitting with one of those old double-action pumps. And I used to pump air down to him while he was underneath. And he used to call this contraption One Kitty Power. And he always knew when I was getting tired, he'd run out of air and have to come up.
Was the air you pumped down oxygen or just air?
No, just air. And it was quite effective, but I used to get a bit tired of this pumping, as you can imagine.
How long did he stay down then?
Oh, he'd stay down about a half an hour at a time and come up and give me a rest and then go down again. It was quite effective.
Did you have any other duties while you were waiting for him in the dinghy?
Yes, I used to have a broom handle with a flap of leather on the end of it, and if I saw sharks while he was underneath, I would flap this leather on the water, and if he wasn't too far away, he could hear it, and that would make him look around for the sharks.
Did he swim rapidly to the surface, or did he just be careful?
No, he was just careful. He encountered many sharks over the years under the sea, but he was never actually menaced with them because he used to go for them. He used to maintain that if you went for a shark, you could frighten it off. But he said they were unpredictable and very curious. They'd come around and look for you and see what you were doing, but was actually never menaced with sharks.
Did he have to adapt his own photographic equipment for underwater use?
Yes, indeed he did. There was nothing at all available in those days, and he had to devise and have made all his own underwater equipment. Of course, he was very thrilled when aqualungs first came in, and he had the first Costo lung in Australia, and that was wonderful.
How did he adapt his cameras for underwater use?
Well, he had a winged camera made, which was rather like steering an aeroplane. The wings looked like an aeroplane, and that was very effective. And sometimes, of course, he went down in a full diving suit, but away, which I was very thankful for.
Were you in the boat then?
Yes, I was on the boat then.
Can you tell us about it?
Well, when he came up and he took his suit off, and underneath the suit they always wear very thick woolen jerseys and things, and when he took this off, you could see where the sea had squeezed his body, and his whole body was full of blood blisters.
It must have been very unpleasant. Did you have any other close shaves when you were doing this work?
He did. He had what he called a close shave with death. Was an encounter with a giant groper. But he came out of that all right because he swirled a lot of sand around and the groper lost him.
How far afield did you go on the reef with your photography?
From Norwest Island on the southern part of the reef right up to Low Isles in the north and many places in between.
Have you visited these places recently?
No, I haven't been for a long time, not since I've been settled on Green Island, which has been for 17 years now.
How long were you actually working on the reef taking photographs?
We were for 39 years, but during that time we took time off for making 2 feature films, which Noel wrote the stories for and produced and directed. One was called Typhoon Treasure, and the other was called The Power and the Glory, which was made during the war and featured our Air Force.
And you worked as a team all the time?
Yes, we worked as a team. We were just a team of 2 all this time. And when we were on feature films, I was the script girl. And we also did some caravan trips out back and made nature films also as a change from the films of the Reef.
Your husband must have been a bit of an inventor with the lack of equipment in those days. What sort of things did he make?
He designed his own optical bench, which was for the filming of the microscopic life of the sea through the microscope. He designed that himself, and it was a very efficient one, which he used all the years, but very, very heavy to cart around.
Didn't your husband have any scientific training to be able to do all this work?
No, it was very remarkable. He was self-taught, and his work on filming through the microscope is of world standard and was recognized by him being made a Fellow of the Royal Microscopical Society, London.
Do you think that his work has now been superseded? Have other people taken up this microscopic work on the Barrier Reef?
No, nobody seems to be doing that, probably because it's the most difficult branch of photography. But to Noel, that was the branch of photography he liked most. I think he liked the challenge.
Do you remember some of the difficulties in photographing through a microscope?
Yes, the last film he made, called Invisible Wonders of the Great Barrier Reef, although it only takes 10 minutes to screen, took 6 months to make, because the microscopic creatures of the sea are very frail, and they just fold up and die when you take them out of the water. So it was a matter of keeping them alive long enough to film them. And of course there's a certain amount of heat through the light you have to have, and although he had a water filter, it still wasn't enough. They used to die, and he just had to persevere until he got them to stay alive long enough to film.
Did you ever go underwater yourself, just for enjoyment?
No, I wasn't a very good underwater person at all. I could swim and that was all.
So you were the backup troops in the boat?
You bet I was, looking for sharks most of the time.
You must marvel at all this new gear that people go out with now and go down to great depths.
Oh, yes, and Noel would have loved all that gear, and I would have loved all the lovely Portuguese equipment for camping, because we used to really have to rough it. All I had to cook with was one of those old camp ovens and the primus. That was all. And I look with envy at all this lovely Portuguese equipment nowadays, and Noel looked with envy at all the lovely new gear for underwater.
Did you have a boat that was big enough to live on?
No, we never could afford that. All we had was a 12-foot dinghy with a little inboard motor, which I used to grandiloquently call the Empress of Green Island.
And so you camped off Green Island?
We camped on Green Island and on many other islands on the reef, mostly uninhabited islands, and none of them had water on the island. You used to have to take all your drinking water with you in 44-gallon drums.
Perhaps you could explain how you operated, how you planned a trip and what a day would be like.
Well, all filming on the reef had to coincide with low tides, so the tides dictated our reef work. And so if it was a very early tide, a low tide, we'd have to get up very early and stay out there as long as the tide was low. It was heavy work in our early Barrier Reef expeditions because and white, and of course the equipment was very much heavier than when we went on to 16mm colour. And as I'm only a little person and the only one to help, most of the heavy gear had to be carried by Noel, and he left me with the lighter gear and nowhere to put it down, of course, when you're out on the reef, so it was pretty hard work. But when 16mm came in, which meant we could film in colour, and the equipment was much lighter. It was very much easier.
And did you plan an expedition that would last a week, or how long were you usually away for?
Oh, we were usually away for the 6 winter months of the year. Then we would go down south to complete the films, put dialogue to them, and sound, and cut and edit them. Noel did all that himself.
But would you make a base camp on an island and work out from there?
Yes, that's what we did. We stayed 2 to 3 months in the one area.
Did you ever long for a house?
Yes, but it was many, many years after I was married before we had a home, and I think the real intention was that Noel had acquired so much scientific equipment he had to have somewhere to house it.
It wasn't for his wife?
No, I don't think so, but I had the joy of having a garden, which was something I'd always wanted.
Well, Green Island's perhaps one of Australia's most famous tourist resorts. What changes have you seen on the island since you arrived here 17 years ago?
Well, the changes have mostly been that where there was once only a guest house, there is now a modern hotel. The island itself hasn't changed. The national park part of it is just the same, thickly wooded and birds and things, just the same.
People often say that tourists destroy a natural paradise like Green Island. Do you think this has happened?
Well, it has happened on the reef, I must say, because tourists, before this was a protected reef, tourists would take away live corals, live shells, and turn stones over and never turn them back, and a lot of life is lost that way. I must say that they do a lot of damage to a coral reef.
Kitty Monkman, who was a youthful 83 when Ros Bowden met her on Green Island in northern Queensland in 1974.